Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. This session will begin at the top of the hour.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is, who is our audience? Structuring successful partnerships. Let me close that countdown timer to get it out of the way here. And there we go. I'm your host for today's webinar, Mike Lasecki, here at the Maricopa Community Colleges. It's my pleasure now to introduce our lead presenter, Rachel Bauer, who is at the University of Wisconsin and the principal investigator of ATE Central. Rachel, will you come on and introduce yourself and your colleagues?
Absolutely, Mike. Do we want to go over any of the chat and how to do various things on the webinar platform?
You know, I appreciate the prompt on that. Colleagues, if you'll look just to the right of your screen, you'll see the chat window there. If you type in a question or a comment and just hit the little speech balloon to the right hand of the box, that goes off to everyone. And then we'll take your questions and comments as time allows. Also, Rachel, today we'll have 3 different polls. Those polls will overlay on the screen when you prompt me, and there'll be radial buttons. These are live polls, so you click on a radial button and you can change your answer as long as the poll is open. I'll announce the closing of the poll and then we'll take a look at the results. There are several question breaks throughout the presentation. Rachel, we'll stop and address the questions that we might have. I think other than that, we're ready to go.
Fabulous. Well, we're thrilled to be here as always. This is the 3rd year that we've done a series of webinars related to sustainability, and I'm here with our primary speaker today is Nancy Marin, who's the founder of Blue Sky to Blueprint. Nancy, do you just want to say hello for a minute?
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
And then we also have our guest, our special guest is Kevin Cooper. Kevin, do you want to just come on and say hi so everybody can hear your voice?
Welcome. I'm excited about the webinar today.
Great. So Kevin will be chatting with you more and introducing himself a little bit later. The first thing we wanted to do before we even get started is just find out a little bit more about yourself. So we're going to start with this first poll. This gives us a chance to practice our polling skills. So if everybody could quickly go ahead and describe themselves here. So we've got some folks from the TACT community, not surprisingly. We have some people who are actually not currently funded but are writing an ATE grant. If you're one of the people who clicked the other button, could you do us a favor and put in the chat window, just give us some sense of, you know, are you just investigating AT? Are you curious about it? Are you an evaluator who's here visiting? Oh, a wannabe. Fabulous. Okay, so somebody says that they're interested in ATE. There's an evaluator coming up, thinking about writing, curious about developing partnerships. So these are all really good reasons to join us. Somebody else is typing now. So it's not really surprising, Nancy, that most of the folks joining are with ATE, but we've got a really nice selection of other people too.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to see.
Okay, so somebody else is actually working on a grant. So that was interesting. All right. So because there's some of you that may be newer to ATE, I just want to talk very briefly about ATE, or the Advanced Technological Education Program at the National Science Foundation. So obviously this is a source of NSF funding. It's an NSF program, ATE. Focuses on technician education, professional development. It's NSF's only program that's really so focused on community colleges too. It's a congressionally mandated program. And it funds about 250, 300 projects and centers a year, depending on the cycle and who's funded and whose grant is ending and all that good stuff. But I think it's important to note that it's not just a funding program, but it really is a community. It's a group that really supports each other, and there are a lot of cross-cutting types of support for community members that go beyond the topical area of people's projects and centers and cross-state, cross over state boundaries. So the project that I'm the principal investigator for, AT Central, is one of those cross-cutting support projects, and our primary purpose is to really amplify the impact of ATE, to spread the word about what ATE is doing, and to figure out ways to support the projects and centers that are funded under this NSF initiative. We have an information hub and portal online, as you can imagine, at atcentral.net. We also have a resource collection where we collect all the valuable deliverables that are created by projects and centers. We have a variety of services and tools, and we focus a lot on outreach and dissemination. One of the things that's really important to us is that whatever we're working on is sort of driven by community needs, and we did a needs survey in 2011, and we continue to do that. And sustainability continues to be something that the AT community really expresses interest in having more information and more support around. So we worked with Nancy and the organization that she was involved with for many years, Ithaca, to set up this series of workshops and webinars. So I want to turn it over to Nancy now, who's going to chat with you a little bit about Ithaca and get into the meat and potatoes, the reason that we're all here. Nancy?
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy, and as Rachel mentioned, I got to know her and the ATA community a bit while I was with Ithaca, and specifically Ithaca SNR. So I thought I'd mention a little bit about the organization. Ithaca itself, which is the umbrella, is a not-for-profit that does a bunch of things that relate to higher education. The first thing that many of you may have heard of is JSTOR, which is a big digital database of scholarly books and articles and primary sources, and a lot of the libraries, the academic libraries, subscribe to it. Ithaca also has this thing called Portico, which is a digital repository for publishers mostly. And then there's Ithaca SNR, which is essentially a think tank, and that's where I headed up a group that was studying sustainability and business models for innovative projects. About 2 years ago, I started to spin off my own little company called Blue Sky to Blueprint. And we work with leaders of innovative projects in academia to develop business strategy around things. It's really a lot of work is in translating concepts from the business community to the academic and cultural communities. So I get to work with lots of NSF funded and NEH and IMLS funded works to figure out what the underlying logic will be that will help these projects to thrive. So I wanted to mention that to set the stage, what we're going to see today in this webinar is really just part of a series of the 3 that we're offering this season. And the overarching aim is really to introduce some of these ideas that we hope you all will be able to put into action pretty quickly. Last year, we actually started introducing guest speakers from the ATE community because we kept hearing how important it was to get really good examples of things that are working. And so this year, we're doing the same. We found that this is such a collaborative community that the more chances there are to kind of hear about what's working and figure out how you can apply it, the better. So the folks we've chosen for this series, I think, are going to be both frank that they haven't figured everything out, but very, very insightful about the things they have figured out to be a real valuable resource for you. Today we're going to hear from Kevin Cooper, who's the PI of the Regional Center for Nuclear Education and Training, also known as RCNet. In addition to having been with that organization from its early days and really understanding the challenges of building up the organization, he also serves as Dean of the Advanced Technology Division at his home institution, Indian River State College. So I think you'll see that this dual role also gives him a very, very interesting vantage point. I'll just show you quickly what the rest of the season is going to look like for us. In February, we're offering a focus on institutional support, and we're still confirming our guest speaker. And in March, we'll have a webinar specifically looking at revenue generation. And that will be Casey O'Brien from CyberWatch. So this is a picture of Kevin, and we'll be hearing from him very, very soon. The format you'll see today is actually quite similar to what we have done last year. And so you'll hear from me. I'm going to start by effectively setting the stage, giving you a little bit of an overview of the topic, and I will attempt to highlight some points that I hope will frame things up. But the bulk of this is really going to be a chance to hear from Kevin. So you'll hear me asking him a bunch of questions that will, open the floor for him to expand a little bit about his thinking in successfully structuring partnerships. But I definitely don't want to be the only one asking him questions. So this is an advance invitation to all of you to think about the things that you'd like to know. As Mike mentioned, we'll be taking questions throughout the presentation and then explicitly opening it up to the floor after Kevin speaks. So for today, the goal for us today is to really introduce this broad definition of sustainability. If you've participated in our webinars before or in the in-person workshops we have done at High Tech and the ATE PI meeting, you'll know that this is a pretty wide-ranging definition of the way we see sustainability. I'm also going to try to illustrate the different kinds of roles that partnerships can play in a sustainability plan. And then finally, we're going to offer a good and what I think will be provocative example of how partnership strategies can work. But first, we have another poll for you. So Rachel, do you want to tee this up for us?
Absolutely. So one of the things we just wanted to, for those of you who are already in the community or even for those of you who are outside of ATE, how much does the success of whatever you're working on rely on partnerships? And there we go. So folks are just answering here. So central to your mission, important but not critical, or really not that necessary for what you're doing. So not surprisingly, we actually have no one saying they're not necessary, which is great to see, and not surprising in ATE where we all rely so much on our various partnerships, whether they're industry partnerships, other educational institutions, professional associations. Okay, that looks like we've got everybody, we've stopped getting answers back, so Mike, I think you can take that one off.
Yeah, and that actually is interesting, and I'm going to guess that the kind of partnership that Kevin's going to talk about most, I'm pretty sure that those of you who think about it that way or have you'll see we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of partnerships, and I'm trying to think of how to say this, but the ones where you don't find them to be central, which is fine, and you'll see that there's this broad continuum. And I think the trick in this, in the webinar and in your thinking about partnerships is just to be really clear about the function of what that partner holds for you. So again, for those of you joining for the first time, I just thought it would be useful to get that big picture of what we mean when we talk about sustainability. So first, I just put out there that there are often a few misconceptions when it comes to sustainability. The first is that it sometimes has this way of sounding a little bit like an end-of-life condition. So something that you're going to think about as you're coming to the end of your grant. Maybe you feel like you need a safe place to park things once you're done with them. And being a good citizen, you don't want them to get lost somewhere. So that is a very noble thought, but it is not the whole story. The second thing people sometimes think about when they hear the word sustainability is that they leap right away to think it's about where's the money? How do I get funding? And that is not an incorrect element of it, but I'd like to make the case that it is not the entire thing. So the ideas we're going to talk about as sustainability are really things that are core to the basic functioning and success of your organization. So we're talking about strategies that will help you build a strong and reliable structure. And that's during the grant, and that's hopefully even after the grant. Even if you're at a really, really early stage, the ideas that we're going to think about today are worth sketching out for yourself as you think about where you'd like to be, whether it's writing a grant or 3 years from now when a grant has been completed. Yes, money is definitely important, but you're going to see it's really just part of the story. So I hope you'll join us actually for the March webinar where we're going to really directly address that topic. But today we're going to tackle something a little more basic, and it's the way you think about the value of the work, and specifically the value of the work for those that you're creating it for. So the premise is the more we focus on the value to your users and your stakeholders, better chance that the funding will follow. So there's no better time to start than now on thinking about it. Get out your pencils and sketch out how you think these ideas will work and plan to revise them as you learn more. So the takeaway here is that sustainability is really a cycle. We want you to think about this as defining a hypothesis about how you're going to be able to continually generate or gain access to the things you're going to need to increase the value of what it is you're doing. So those might be financial things like funding and actual, money from other sources, or they could be volunteer time and cooperation from partners. But whatever those things are, you want to think about what the value is to your partners in sharing with you, and from what do you get from those partners in exchange. The plan that you develop as a sustainability plan is going to be something really based on knowing that those values are real and having some sense that they are going to be reliable over the long term. So here's another way to think about this. Let's say you start off with a great idea. And obviously it's a great idea because it's your idea. You think it's terrific. Your colleagues think it's terrific. And if you get lucky, not lucky, but things go well, a funder thinks it's terrific and you get funded. So, you could think that you are home free. And I'd say almost. So you probably did some research thinking about things early on as you were developing your proposal, but you may look around and think about other things that are going to have an impact on your success. So if you look on the left side, the little smiley faces suggest you want to think pretty hard about what your audience is really going to need, how much you know about them, what is it that you're really going to be able to deliver to them, and is it working? Do they agree that it's working? So when we say audience, we're thinking about the end users, the people who really benefit directly, and stakeholders, people who benefit possibly a little less directly. But how they respond to your work really means everything. In addition to your audience, you may also want to take a look around and make sure that others are not already doing what it is you plan to do. So if you look over to the right side of this slide, you see those cute little trees. And that suggests that there's a big environment in there that you fit into someplace. So we're not going to talk a lot about that today, but it's a reminder that this environmental scan can really help you to figure out where your idea fits in the bigger landscape. And this is a terrific thing to do because it helps you to be clear about the niche that you are filling, and it also can help you identify gaps you may want to address, and it may even help you identify potential new partners you may want to work with.
Nancy, we have a couple of interesting questions that have been raised in the chat window that I thought we might want to grab right now. I know we aren't at a break quite yet, but somebody did ask through email that they thought the end-of-life analogy is interesting, that one aspect that they're interested in is if they're working on sharing, they're working on a grant, I guess, and they're interested in who they can share their plan with. Like if they're working on a grant and they have a plan, or maybe even they already have a grant, who would they share their plan with to get feedback?
That's interesting. I mean, in my experience, and I'm getting to guess it's similar in this program, is that they're often the program officers and their staff are often willing to kind of listen in and give feedback in early stages on things like this. I also wonder, Rachel, if ATE Central itself is kind of, a way for people to meet other people who want to kind of compare notes on this.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing we always want to remember is that there are places like Evaluate and Mentor Connect who both have lots of expertise in the area of evaluation and also in grant writing and sustainability. So there are lots of resources within the community and we can follow up. Whoever sent that email, and if they are listening, they're welcome to email me, and I can try to connect them to someone. Someone else said, how do you measure sustainability? What metrics do you use to measure success?
Well, I mean, there's a couple ways to think about this, and here's where, again, like one of the great things is how much emphasis the ATE program puts on evaluation, and the kind of measurements that you establish with your evaluator are a big part of it. In other words, if things are going well and you're achieving the impact that you promised and exceeding it, meaning it's often the number of people you've reached, the outcomes they've had as a result of your being in contact with them, the uptake of a program or curriculum within the community by other institutions, those are pretty traditional ways of measuring success. And so I think that for sustainability measures, those are like signs of health of the project or the center. When you think about like what you want to brag about in a sustainability plan, that's part of it. And then the other part is what the mix of types of support will be. So we're not talking a lot about finances today, but the logic in a pure sustainability plan would be identifying all the financial sources that you'd expect to have, what your reasoning is for why you think those sources are forthcoming, but not just financial sources, also all of those other sources. So in a real sustainability plan, you'd also be bragging about not just how many partners I have, but what am I getting from them every year? And how deep are those ties, and how much can I count on them? So that's the difference between a pure like business plan where you're looking at, just a financial figure, and a sustainability plan where you're talking about people's willingness to contribute in a variety of ways to your work.
And Nancy, I think this also, I think it's great, and I also think it gets back to your point of the earlier you get started, the better, because if the more you can kind of interweave sustainability and evaluation, the better chance you have of being able to think about sustainability as something else you want to evaluate as you go through the cycle of your project or center.
Yeah. So I'm going to share first a pretty traditional way of thinking about partners, and then I'm going to kind of pivot a little, because one of the things that's so interesting about Kevin's work is his approach to a certain kind of partner. So I hope I do this right, and if there's anything that you have questions about, obviously just feel free to jump in. But the first thing I think about typically when I work with folks is you have a list of things you want to do, and it comes to, let's say, the end of the grant, and you're putting together your plan for what do I do next, or how do I support it all. And your first question is, what is it that you want to be doing, and how much can you do, and how much will you need help with? So those things could include generating content. In this case, it's often curriculum. It could be actually finding financial, support. It could be just expanding the impact, building audience, which in this case can be recruiting students, or audience could also be finding instructors who will adopt the curriculum. It could be other things, just like proving, the information has gotten out about your work to other institutions, people, students, teachers, whoever they are. And then other times it's something specific, like there's a specific need to have new updated equipment, access to technology for the trainings you might want to run. I'm just going to show you this one little chart. I swear it's the only worksheet you're going to see today. But to remind you that when we do workshops, we actually have people roll up their sleeves, work through some of these questions in a brainstorming session with us. And several of these are available on the ATE Central website. But in this case, this is the kind of thing where you might actually do a personal brainstorm and say, what's the impact I want my work to have? In order to achieve that impact, what is it that I'm going to have to sustain over the long term? For the term of the grant, and even beyond, if I want to keep this running. How much content, how quickly does it have to be developed? That sort of thing. How many new modules per quarter, per year, and so on and so forth. And you kind of take that thought process through all the elements of running your project or center. And then you ask yourself, which of those things can we do? And which of those things are we going to need to figure out how others can help us do? This is just a way to get it started. So partners can help in a lot of different ways. So some partners are bringing in expertise from outside the organization. Some are there because they add capacity. You just don't have the staff and you need to have other bodies and other organizations pitching in. Some just help get the word out. And others may actually be sources of funding. So I'll give you a couple of examples and then and we'll see what these different types are. Because on one hand, there's such a richness in the ways this can work, but sometimes I get extremely frustrated with this richness because I feel like it can get a little bit muddying. But we'll start like this and then we'll try to clean things up, I promise. So one logic is this idea of bringing in expertise and increasing capacity. So some kind of cool examples. Space Tech is from the ATE community. So this is a center that focuses on the aerospace industry. And so one of the things they do is they work with industry partners to define new areas because one of their big things is creating certifications. And so they work with industry partners who have the area expertise to make sure that they're doing this in the right way. NSDL, which was an NSF-funded project for educators, had a different logic. They had some partners, and the partners came from different fields. And they started with a curriculum focus, and they brought in partners who could add access to the teachers they wanted to reach and the evaluators that they needed. So in that sense, they were bringing in expertise from different domains to inform their work. And finally, this is maybe a little bit of a different type of example, but this Digit Zeitschriften is actually it's a German funded project, an academic project of digitization, where there were a collection of libraries. And in this case, they were bringing in expertise because each partner focused on a different academic discipline, and they each added to the partnership in that way, and they considered themselves partners. So another logic for this is really just to increase the impact. Let's say you've done something great, but you're only one institution, for example, and you really think that this could be done at a much, much bigger scale. So one example of this is something like MATE, the Marine Advanced Technology Education Center, which does all kinds of fun things, including their underwater robotics competitions. And in their case, they have a whole bunch of educational partners. And the logic is these partners take the curriculum that they've developed, and they actually make use of the contests that MATE has developed. And MATE sees this as a great way. They're happy to share this because they want to see this expanded and carried out in a much broader way. It's a similar logic for Vesta, which is viticulture, so dealing with the grape and wine industry. And there again, they want their academic institutions to be able to expand the reach of that curriculum. And they have industry partners too who offer lots of physical locations for people to do practical internships on site. Space Tech is another example here again, where the training itself gets delivered and propagated through a collection of partners, academic colleges, that actually help manage the curriculum. And finally, the partners actually do have ways to contribute funding. So with MATE, for example, they actually get corporate sponsors who underwrite their contests. And that's a pretty straight up sponsorship model where they pay money to help them offset the costs of running those contests. I figure maybe I shouldn't speak to this. We've got folks from Maytech on the line, but another example here of where the funding source comes from a different kind of partner, which is even the host institution. So your host institution decides to participate by, in this case, underwriting some budget lines for the work you're doing. So this is just a way to think of different logics for why you would want partners to add the expertise, to add to reach, possibly to add to funding. Maybe this is a good place for a break before we jump into the next section. Any questions?
So I don't see any more questions coming up on chat. Oops, somebody's typing something. So we'll see if that's another question. We haven't had any other questions show up, though.
Oh, and we also have a
poll. So let's start with the poll question, and if
yep. We can always jump back in.
We can always jump back in. So we're asking you to just sort of tell us a little bit about what your primary partnership challenge is. Is it finding the right partner? Is it finding the time to nurture that partnership, that relationship? Or is it legal considerations? Or is it something else? And again, if it's something else, go ahead and type what that something else is into the chat box. So we have a question that came in about do you have problems getting adjunct professors? I'm not sure in what context that relates to the partnerships. Maybe if whoever typed that in could give us a little bit more context for that, that would be great. All right, so it looks like, wow, the difficulty for most folks is not finding the right partner. It's really in finding the time to nurture that relationship, and then legal is the second one. And then other, we haven't heard from anybody about what some other ones are. A couple people are typing in here.
Well, and this is going to be interesting too, because I think especially folks who struggle to find the time to nurture the relationship, I think the things that Kevin will have to share, I don't think he has any great time savers for you, but he at least he can tell you a bit about how he's gone about doing that. The legal considerations are also interesting. I know that in some cases the relationships are kind of loose, and in other cases they may actually be governed by an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, so that they're quite carefully spelled out. Yeah, and one of our comments here says working out contracts between academic institutions is challenging, and I can imagine.
Oh, there we go. That's interesting too. That industry partners get impatient because the pace is slower with education. They're tough to maintain, it says.
Yeah. So this is good. So,
I
Rachel,
see. So this is interesting. That adjunct issue was related to the fact that do you get adjuncts from industry partners? Are they willing to provide employees to help with teaching? That's an interesting question, and maybe Kevin can talk about that, or someone else can address that. I think we can close the poll mic.
Let's hold on to that question, and Rachel, we can make sure we come back to that.
Absolutely.
And we'll open it to the whole floor, because I bet there might be people on the line who can respond to that better than I can.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me just offer a quick overview of kind of a way of thinking about this vast spectrum of partnerships. I'm going to suggest that some of the models, because I'm trying to figure out what makes a partner, because I think it'll have something to do with how much you have to structure the relationship, how much you get from it, how much you rely on it. So I think one way to think about it is some of them are partnerships of equals. And the way this looks is, let's say you have 3 academic institutions and you all think it's really important to create a new kind of curriculum. You work together and maybe you contribute different parts of the project, but you all have really the exact same aim. And that's like an example, like the example I gave of the dozen German libraries working together. They all wanted the exact same thing. They each took a different slice, but they were in it for the same reasons. Another kind of example was the NSF-funded kind of educational website, where I mentioned that there were 3 partners, but they were all very different organizations. And so that was interesting. They had different strengths, but again, they were in it for the exact same reason. They all wanted to see the outcome be successful, and they wanted the same outcome. So that's going to be very different from this kind of a partner, where I've seen, particularly in sustainability plans that are talking about revenue generation, you might hear someone who developed curriculum and they're licensing it out to somebody else, or they've created a textbook and they're selling it again, or licensing it. It's for use. And these, to me, are very, very different. They're sometimes called partnerships because I think everyone feels better if they think of themselves as a partner. It seems like a friendlier connection. But those are really vendor and client relationships, if not, customer relationships. So I'd keep an ear open for that. Those work very differently. Along the same lines, sponsorship. I more often hear the word partner when we think about when you really look at it is a business transaction. So I'm sure the sponsors who underwrite the MATE contests have only good things in mind when they're doing this. I'm sure they're doing it for all the right reasons, but they are also doing it because it's a bit of a transaction. So in exchange for underwriting a competition, they really want access to the people there. They want their name to be seen. They want to make sure that people hear about them and hopefully have good feelings and strong feelings and positive feelings about their company. So that's again more of a business transaction. Host institution again is a very different animal, and a very, very important one. Like I said, we'll be talking about that in some real detail next month. Your host is really a natural ally, and in that sense, still needs a lot of care and feeding. But the connections are a little bit different. Those could be in-kind contributions or direct support. And finally, this is, I think, a little bit closer to the kind of thing we'll be talking about today. The close ties that you may have between your work and your industry partner. You have very different things maybe that you get out of it, or maybe they're a little bit closer, but they have to be defined. So in this case, it might be an internship for students. It's great for you because you get your students the work, and it's great for them because they're fulfilling, they're enhancing their workforce. So I just kind of sketched this out to think about it, maybe make it a little bit easier to think about. But as you go through those different categories of partners, you want to think about the kind of protections and the considerations that you'll want to take. So for a partnership of equals, all of these things, and really almost all of these, the considerations are the more carefully the relationship can be defined, the better. When you get down to things like a vendor-client relationship and sponsorship relationship, for example, there's a much higher level of service and support that those might require. It's not that the others don't require a very high level, but that's really, they might be in more of a take it or leave it kind of a relationship to your work. They may be more interested in the transactional value than they are in the mission, and that makes it a little bit dicier. But none of these categories kind of lets anyone off the hook for how important it is to kind of stay in close touch and provide a lot of good evidence that the partnership is having a lot of benefit for that partner. So in thinking about this, I've talked a lot about the word partner, but I wanted to step back for a second before I turn things over to Kevin, because when we started this webinar, we really were talking about audience and stakeholders, and we're partners in all this. So I wanted to show you where I think they are, and I would always love to have your thoughts about whether or not you agree with this. But typically when we think about audience and stakeholders, people make a distinction between those who benefit directly and those who benefit slightly less directly. So one way to call that would be direct beneficiaries and indirect. Other people, you could say users could be direct beneficiaries, your audience could be direct beneficiaries. But it's an interesting distinction. It's those who benefit most directly first. So what do we mean by that? When you're writing a grant, for example, you're probably spending most of your time explaining to your funder who is really going to get the biggest value from this. And I'm just going to guess from what I know about ATE that almost always that is going to be students, it is going to be instructors who are going to use the curriculum, and it is probably going to be, could even be other institutions who may want to start their own academic programs with the materials and the ideas that you create. So your project or center is going to be delivering their value to this audience, and it's an audience that benefits very immediately and very directly from the things that you create for them. On the other hand, these indirect beneficiaries, here's just a smattering of ideas. I would call your host one of these indirect beneficiaries. I like to think of them as benefiting from the fame and glory that they get from the fact that you have won a national grant, for example, and that the work you're doing is bringing in great reviews. So they benefit from that in a sense. They like that. That's reputationally wonderful for them. And if they don't realize it, they should. Other colleges and universities may also benefit in indirect ways. It might be that whether it's the students or instructors who now have better materials to use, those are somewhat direct also, but they may also be indirect beneficiaries because you may not always be creating work directly for them. And finally, these industry partners. One way to think about it is that you train the students, and then the industry partners obviously benefit because there are people out there that can be part of the workforce that are better suited than they were before they went through your programs. But the more I learn about this program, meaning ATE, the more examples I feel like we see where actually industry partners in a lot of ways could be thought of as very direct beneficiaries. So I don't know if anyone writes a grant and says, I'm writing this grant because I want to, because my goal is to make this company more profitable. I'm pretty sure that's not usually the language. But the truth is, in the work you do in creating better employees for them and better skilled workers for them, they benefit very, very directly. So I want to suggest that in this case, these industry partners are a very, very interesting category of stakeholder where they benefit much more directly than, say, your host institution by the work that you do. So with that thought out there, I will just leave you with these ideas that the closer you can get to figuring out what is so important to this audience, in this case, your partners, that they're going to advocate for it. They may pay you for it. And at the very least, they're going to donate their time, maybe their staff time, maybe their equipment. Whatever is going to make it valuable to them is going to be really, really important to you. So I hope that's made the case for why we're all here today. And I'll take another pause for questions, and then we're going to go to Kevin.
So Nancy, we have had a couple of questions come up. Somebody emailed again in and asked about working with private foundations to be part of the sustainability plan. In other words, rather than federal funding. That's something that was raised. I don't know if that's something you want to address.
Not at length necessarily today, but I would, in general, when we talk about the financial kind of portfolio that you might want, I think it's a great idea to include multiple funding sources. So there's probably too many, I'd guess, ATE funded initiatives that are funded only by ATE, as opposed to even by multiple funders. Forget about multiple types of funding. So the idea of thinking about foundations is great, and they have other challenges, but again, I won't get into that too much, but they don't always pay overheads and things like that. It depends on the foundation. But in principle, it's a very good idea to keep even the grant portfolio a little more diverse than just one funder.
There's also a lot of interest in the different types of partnership.
Yeah, I would
handout. So let's get that posted.
That would be great. So I'm going to turn things over to Kevin, who is going to start with an intro, and then I will jump back in and grill him with lots of tough questions for him to answer. But first, we'll just turn it over to Kevin. Hey, Kevin.
Thank you, Nancy. First, I want to start by thanking Nancy and Rachel and Mike for having me here today. As she said at the very beginning, I'm with Indian River State College. I'm the Dean of Advanced Technology there. And I'm also with the ATE community. I've been a proud member of the ATE family for 7 years now as the PI of a center focused on training nuclear technicians. I've been associated with NSF for about 20 years. And I hope I'm able to answer a lot of the questions that got posed today during my talk. I think I have a decent answer for how to deal with the pace of education and also how to get a commitment of teaching from your industry partners with the approach I took. But I want to take about 10 seconds and tell you about my history because it's germane to the conversation and it really guided me with how I built partnerships. I'm an engineer by trade all the way through with a PhD, and I went to work for a large Fortune 500 company, both here in the US and overseas for about 9 years. And then I spun off a small business, and for the next decade, I was a small business entrepreneurial owner of multiple businesses. And Nancy started with it, talking about the entrepreneurial approach. And she hit the nail on the head. And that's really where we got to. We got to the fact that we had to look at building partnerships and what education in an ATE center offered entrepreneurially. We had to see who our end user was, which is who Nancy talked about in the previous slide of who was using your product. And in a lot of cases, the product at the end of the day, in my eyes, is students. Who's using your students? That's industry. But who is purchasing what an ATE has to have? And that's colleges, the curriculum you have. So there's multiple end users here that you have to consider. And the reason I start with the entrepreneurial approach is you also have to look at the saboteur. And in a lot of cases, the saboteur, the person who could be your worst enemy, is actually the person you always start with, which a lot of times is faculty. A faculty likes to teach things a certain way, may not always have buy-in to the way you like to introduce new curriculum in a new field, at not your school, but at schools across the country as you go. So you have to be careful with every group and understand, is it a user, is it a saboteur, is it someone interested? And that's really the approach we took. So I want to go through who RCNet is for about 5 minutes. And along the way, I want to point out how we went about building partnerships and our approach to sustainability. So as I mentioned, we're a center focused on nuclear energy. And this is an important slide here because it goes into the partnership model. We started only in that green box there. We started solely as energy generation. And in 2008, 2009, it was a great time, and then things changed. And our industry partners had to change, and our academic partners had to change. There was fracturing that created less need for nuclear energy. We went from a renaissance to a low. We had Fukushima go on in there. And we had to be very dynamic in all matters, and we had to figure out who our partners were. And so we had to look, and one of the areas is environmental management, the cleanup of the world, the Cold War efforts. Another is manufacturing. There's a whole lot of nuclear used in, whether it's imaging in the medical industry or in the cross-linking of tires or you name it. And the last is life and plant sciences, and this is radioisotopes. So we had to go out and refine new partners. And I love the fact that the second poll we took said that nurturing relationships was the hardest part. And it made me smile. Just today, I've given 3 tours of our facility to organizations that I've met with multiple times, just different people. We have a tendency to forget how big companies are, how big colleges are and universities are. And just because you made a relationship and a partnership with a person at a school doesn't mean you have a strong partnership. Their role may have changed. They have moved on. So it's a constant nurturing a relationship. And hopefully I can give you some idea of the best way to nurture it. And in a lot of these cases, on those 4 partnerships, it was the same company, just a different division. Contractors are fairly typical across the board. Bechtel works in all 4 of those industries. We work very closely with Bechtel in placing students and forming partnerships at various colleges, but it was a different division every time. And so I want to go, like all the other ATE centers, we're focused on curriculum development, embedding best practices, professional development for our faculty, and then the career and academic pathways and career assistance. And that's very similar across the board. What's unique is how we went about partnerships. And this is one of the things I hope helps along the way. When we formed the partnership, we always try to start top down. And we always try to start with introductions from peers. So I will give a local example. At Indian River State College, we had a strong relationship with the local energy generator, FP&L, or outside the area called Next Era Energy. They understood the value of the partnership. They understood the value of a homegrown workforce. They understood the return on investment from partnering with us meant. They were our advocate to get us meetings at the highest level, at sometimes CEO level at Southern Company or Duke or Exelon, or even at Department of Energy with directors of different divisions. Then we went in with our strong academic partners, letting them be our ambassador, and we preached the benefit of the partnership. We preached from a business sense the return on investment of how, we had data on how much local talent stayed versus how much imported talent stayed. The percent, it was about 14% more local talent stayed. Then we asked our industry relationship to then invite the president of the community college in that region to a meeting. And it came from a large industry partner. And we really went with the top-down approach. So then from there, we had a meeting with the industry partner in the region and the academic partner in the region, and we formed a partnership at a high level. And Nancy said it best when she said partnership has a unique meaning. It means something different to all of us. My personal meaning is always If we succeed, they succeed. Their problems are our problems are their problems. We can call each other at any point in time and help each other along the way. And we define a partnership really 3 ways. And we went to every school and we said this, and we said, if this program is going to work, and we helped form 38 college industry partners across the nation, so we really did this over and over again. What we said is you need to have a commitment, a true commitment on paper. It needs to be both ways. There was a question earlier about how to find adjuncts. One of the things spelled out in the MOU was this industry will provide subject matter experts to teach, and we list out the classes, and it was a true partnership. For instance, FP&L locally has 14,000 employers. They have something like 1,400 masters in engineering on staff. It's a heck of a lot easier for them to find an electronics engineering professor than it is for me to put an ad in the paper and say, hey, does anybody want to make 1/10 of their current salary for adjuncting? So we really had a commitment. It was a 2-way commitment. We agreed to launch the program for 8 years, and they agreed to provide subject matter experts for 8 years, not only to teach, but to regularly look at the guided pathway, to regularly look at the curriculum, to employ them in internships. And I'll get into that guided pathway and internships in a minute, but it was a true commitment. And this is where it got tricky. The commitment was signed at a high level, but the people implementing the commitment changed regularly. And that's where you had to be dynamic, and you really had to put the legwork in. And it's the dynamic nature of going back. When we started with FP&L, we had a sole partnership with the nuclear power plant. Well, after 5 years, we saturated that market. They didn't need our employees anymore. So we had to go back and say, hey, we've saturated this market. What now? And we had to get dynamic. We brought in substation, transmission, distribution, and I gave tour after tour after tour, and we had meeting after meeting, and all those players over the last 8 years have constantly changed. So it's constantly reintroducing yourself eyeball to eyeball to the new player and selling the nature of it, but going back to showing the success over the last years. And that's what I'm going to show you in the next slides, the slides that I bring in when I go in. So I show them, this is where we've built partnerships. We have over 100 industry partnerships and 55 academic partnerships and agency partners to this day. Someone asked a question about foundational partnerships. Those are a little trickier. We've actually built a couple of them, and a couple countries come over in their foundations to replicate what we have. But what I do when I go around is I give the grand scheme the highest level. I say we have about 2,000 students in the program, and 95% of them graduate, get placement. That's an important bullet to make to industry and to academia when we're in a world of performance-based funding. In a world where 15 states now get their budget based upon how many people graduate, how many place, that's an important point to make at a high level as you're building academic partnerships. We've helped 12 schools launch their program from nothing. We've helped about 40 schools increase degrees offered at their program. We built partnerships with the Navy, United Negro College Fund, and we host events. Those pictures down there are pretty cool. We host very high level. That's Governor Whitman at the bottom left, and that's someone very high at the Navy who we help standardize the curriculum. And one of the things to remember is you have to be cognitive of the politics of the time. A couple years ago, the Navy became super important as we were getting people to come out of the military. It's important always, but it was important, and more schools listened to us and more industry listened to us when we said we had this Navy partnership. So you have to be very cognitive of the points. And then the local level, we can talk about the super high graduation and placement rates, the high salaries, the number of certificates that an employer gets when they hire one of our students. It accelerates their training, basically. So we go in and talk about the return on investment locally, and we can say this can be here too for you. The articulation is a super important point because this silver tsunami that's happened where people are retiring. The nuclear industry grew in the 70s, and people are retiring today, basically. And you're not just losing entry-level technicians, you're losing all levels of leadership. So being able to say every one of your students that hired automatically articulates in these schools and they can continue on a leadership track was super important in building partnerships. We talk about how many graduated and what their average salaries were and where they graduated. And then we show this, and this is a huge slide for any area. We do the typical multipliers. We have 200 jobs, 55 a year, the EDA multiplier of 2 per job, So it's about $22 million yearly impact to any school that wants to launch a program. Or over our 10 years, $220 million. And when I go in and talk to presidents, I say this has brought $9.8 million of grants and lots of national accolades, and all the accolades are listed here to the college, and you're partnering with this, you're getting this legitimacy. So that said, we request three things of all our partners. We request them to be committed, we request them signing a contract showing the commitment, and in every case, the commitment is something different. In our case at IRSC, the commitment is to teach classes, to do a supply and demand balance, to take them as an internship, and then in exchange, we will offer this program for as many years as they need it, even if some years it runs small. You know, from a financial standpoint, we're a college, we'd like to make money, but we've agreed to run this for as many years as they need, even if we're only running a class size of 12. And I'll get into that in 1 second. And then we ask them to be dynamic and to change over time. And to understand, since we have a top-down approach, things move fast here because I have the buy-in of my president and the other schools have the buy-in of their president. Things move fast. The pace of education doesn't always get in the way. Sure, you have to go to curriculum committee when you're setting things up and you have to make sure it's accredited by your accrediting body. But things move very fast when you have a top-down approach, both from industry and from academia. And I want to give a full example of how it works here, just so you understand, and then I'll give one example of how. So the example I give is when we set up the program, we set up a true guided pathway at IRC, which means students come in and in less than 2 years, in 18 months, they take all their classes to get an AS degree. There's no exceptions, there's no alternative classes, it's a true guided pathway, which us in industry set up and selected the classes. And and what's beautiful about it is you take 1 year of classes, and then the students do an internship at the industry partner. And during the internship, they rotate through all the various divisions of that company that would represent the tracks they can go into as a nuclear worker. That'd be in instrument and controls, electrical, mechanical, radiation protection, quality assurance, quality control, non-destructive testing. They get a exposure, no pun intended, to each of those areas. And then at the end of that internship, we sit down with our primary 4 industry partners at our school, and we do a supply and demand balance. And we say, how many will each of you need in each of these 4 disciplines? And then we match industry with the student's desire for the second year. So the first year is the same for all of our students. The second year, they split it up into the disciplines, and we match the supply and demand balance. And that second year, this is where the commitment is in place. Those classes have been taught by FP&L and other partners as well. And then the other thing that's beautiful about this is they come in and the partner reinforces the soft skills. And by teaching them, it's basically a 1 year job interview. And so they're hiring them at the end. And they know which ones are good, which ones fit their organization, which ones are not good. So you're getting all of this during the thing. And the reason this example is so important is because we started with a nuclear approach. Everything was nuclear and nuclear saturated. So then we brought to the table, after lots of effort, and it's almost like forming a new partnership, substation to the table. And we said, okay, here's the curriculum, here's the learning outcomes. What do you need to be included so that they could possibly work in a substation? And we did the same with transmission. Then we did the same with distribution. Then we did the same with fossil generation. And we made a comprehensive program that covers all those areas by bringing all the people and reinforcing it. But it's the overall commitment that made that work. And that's really what we've gone across the country and shared. That and the return on investment of everything that's going on. So we met. So you now have a glimpse of how we set up our program here. We then took this, took this on the road with our industry partner, our advocate, our ambassador, took it to school and preached it and brought in and made the same sort of partnerships, the same sort of memorandum of understanding, the same sort of commitment at all these schools. And this takes me full circle. At the very beginning of the conversation, Nancy said, what makes a program sustainable? And there's 2 ways of looking at that. As an ATE grant, eventually funds are going to run out. So either, that's just the nature of life. Eventually funds are going to run out. So either, to tell the truth, your salaries are going to become institutionalized, and that means your institution needs to understand the value of your center, or or your program sustain. And that's really what I look at it from a dean's perspective now. A sustainable program is one where industry hires at the end of the day. If industry is hiring your grads, you'll have people coming in the front door. And if the way to get industry to hire your grads is to listen to their needs and constantly reinforce what you can do for them to different faces all the time. We at this point in time, we place very few in the nuclear industry, but we place 95% with our industry partners. And typically every year we have about 48 seats, and we have over 250 applicants for those 48 seats without an ounce of advertising. It's word of mouth, just like nursing, just like public safety. It's word of mouth. There's jobs at the end of the day. And so we've created a sustainable mechanism by constantly, every year, going back, looking at the guided pathway, changing it, making sure it matches industry's needs. And that's what we recommend to all our partners. So my personal definition of sustainability is when our grant funding is long gone, these programs, these 38 programs we have across the nation continue to be sustainable. Even if the nuclear industry stops, it's just a sustainable mechanism using best practices to train people for the energy or nuclear world. So at this point, I'm open to any questions you may have. I see there was some typing. I was trying to read it as I was talking. That's almost impossible.
This is great, and actually, I'll try to read the questions and kind of consolidate them for you. But at first, I want to thank you for this terrific kind of presentation that encompassed a whole lot in an awfully short amount of time. You know, in a way, I think the more you talk about the way you think about industry partners, I wish we could almost do an informal poll with folks on the line, because to my ears, it's not necessarily clear that everyone already is doing this, but to you, your starting point is to identify the entire value chain and where it ends. And where it ends is if it doesn't result in the hiring of your students, it didn't work. Right, so it sounds like, in a way, tell me if this makes some sense, what you're describing is kind of almost reverse engineering it by saying what's got to happen at the end of the day is my students have to get hired. If I want that to happen, I've got to go to the folks who would hire them and make sure that I know not just what they need to learn, but even how many of them are going to be needed. So it sounds to me like it puts the industry partner not just in a secondary role, but really in a primary role. Is that accurate?
I would say the success of our program is that we have placement at the end of the day. You're absolutely correct. If you look at it backwards, your end user in this case is your industry. They're hiring your product is your students. And in every case, it's a little bit different. What does your local industry partner want? And why aren't they hiring your students? And why, you know, in our case, it was, why are you bringing people from out of town? And we had to understand that, and it was technical skills. And then a couple years ago, when we asked the question again, the answer actually changed. It was, they're not taking, your graduates are not taking pride and ownership they understand everything technically. They just don't, it's a job, it's not a career. They're not taking pride and ownership. So we tried to address that by making a book on the topic and having lectures on the topic. So it's constantly reinforcing understanding and listening to what your customer wants. In our case, I really believe the customer is industry, and then adapting, being adaptive and making your changes. And what I've seen in the local example, I can't harp on enough, our local generation facility here in Fort Pierce, Florida, in 8 years has gone through 12 hiring managers. So it's constantly, each of them has a different perspective, and each of them, to be bluntly honest, we're about 10 miles away from them. I would say 75% of them have never heard of the college. So it's constantly nurturing, as you put on your poll. You hit the nail on the head there. It's constant nurturing and re-engaging and telling them about you again, and it's selling over and over and over again.
So can you tell us, and you mentioned in the course of your talk some of the ways you do this, but could you just what's been the most effective way to stay in touch? Because you have an awful lot of partners right now, and when I'm talking here about the industry partners. Are these phone calls or these in-person visits? What's your best kind of?
You know, I'm a true believer in eye to eye. I mean, I guess we're on a webinar right now, which is ironic, but we try to host, and this is where there was a couple questions of who pays for what. We give stipends to industry partners to come to our workshops along with academic partners along the way, and we pay to have perhaps up to 3 meetings a year where we review everything. There's really no lectures in those meetings. We're locked in a room. Typically, we do it at INPO in Atlanta. It's an easy place to fly into. INPO is one of the regulatory bodies for the nuclear industry. They give us a whole floor, actually, a working room. We say, okay, let's go first for the next 4 hours. We're going over the curriculum. We're figuring out where the gaps are year by year. Next, we're going over, your evaluation of your employees, what's missing in the skill set. So we're bringing them all together. And just like the AT is a community, that's one of the things we've done. We've created a sense of community. And you can do that locally if it's just locally. What everyone wants to be part of is something. And, if you bring them all together and they all have common gripes, they all have common concerns, and it gives you a sense. And if someone's listening and you can go back and say, last semester, this was your concerns, this is how we are adjusting, it validates the relationship. So bringing them together eye to eye is what I'd answer in a long-winded way.
No, that's great. And I wonder if I'm keeping an eye on the chat to see if people have other questions on these tactics, because I sometimes think that just kind of knowing exactly ways that people do things can be really, really useful. So, I had another question for you about how you grew this number. So I think, did you mention that you have 100? The number of industry partners seem to cover those
we have over
entire
100
map.
At this point in time, 100 industry partners, and
can you describe?
I want to answer Susan's question real quick. She asked. Susan asked, do we run up against industry wanting universities? And I would say absolutely. And, I don't, it's hard. A lot of the colleges we work with, including IRSC, have tremendous, tremendous facilities. And the common answer I always get is, I say, please come here, let me tour you, let me introduce you to the amazing faculty we have, and that's the way I've always gone about it. You can't, and the answer I always get after giving a tour is, I didn't realize this existed here. I got to tell somebody. And I say, you're an ambassador now, go out and tell 10 people to come tour it as well. And that's really how I've addressed Susan's question there of, yes, I would agree. A lot of people have their nose in the air and rather work with universities. And it's a battle, and I just try to get them here and try to get them to meet our faculty, try to get them to see a class, try to get them to tour our facilities, or I encourage others that have this type of phenomenal institution to do the same. And it's really always about education.
There's another question that we just got that actually came into my chat, that somebody asked Kevin that you had sort of mentioned that your industry is driven by the winds of change, and that do these industry partners actually, do they sort of have a role in helping you prepare for the long term given all of those changes that can happen in an industry?
It's a great question, and I think that's what's very important. As all the AT community is delegated into fields, so high-tech fields, biotech, Maytech, all these materials, wine, space, and you have to be very, very careful that you don't become a boutique field and or a boutique program. And that's where industry really helped us over the years. When different areas, when technology evolved, they provided the resources. When they understood that things were changing, they provided the direction. So our sustainability really is about making programs that are sustainable in the long term. It's not necessarily a financial sustainability as an ATE center, but it's more IRSC has a strong program, Chattanooga State has a strong program, Augusta Tech has a strong program. And if any one or two industry partners comes or goes, the program stays strong because it has such a hiring base now, and it has such a strong impact of their employers that we can be dynamic and grow over time. It's very hard if you're boutique and you're relying upon one partner or two partners, or you're relying upon a very specific technology. So even if you're in a specific field, I recommend broadening that field somewhat, and that's what we had to do.
That's terrific. And you mentioned that this is some of these folks in industry, probably not all 100, but participate in an advisory capacity along with some of the academic partners. Am I getting that right? So that you're
I would say, yeah, very few participate in our advisory council. We try to keep that like NSF request to 8 or 9 partners. But each of the schools has its own advisory council, and all these partners are on one of our partner colleges advisory councils, one of the programs we help set up. And when we have meetings, for instance, next week, the largest nuclear training meeting, you probably have all 100 partners there. We're hosting one day on remedial math, actually, how to get students from remedial math into technology programs. And we probably had 100 plus industry partners, because make sure you network with the large conferences that they're going to be at. And we all have a tendency of falling back and going to our own conferences, the high tech, the ATE, the other ones, but go to the industry conferences. That's where I see a real void of the ATE community. When I go to PowerGen, which represents every form of power generation, there isn't an ATE person or an NSF person there. It is the biggest industry conference for all of energy, probably 100,000 plus participants, but we have a tendency to go to our own spectrum of conferences where we know people and feel comfortable. I'd advise everyone to broaden their horizon on that front.
That sounds like a great point. Can you speak a little bit to, if you can roll back the hands of time to when you were first getting started and thinking about this, and maybe tell us a little bit about, like, what did you know or think you knew about who these partners would be? And then how did you go about expanding from the first few to where you are today?
I'm going to answer this in a very blunt fashion. I came from a major university and I went to a large company, and I didn't think I would ever hire from a community college. And I didn't know what a community college was. And I had the tremendous fortune of ending up at a community college, which I love to death. But I went in on day one assuming that they had a misconception of what a community college offers. And I try to meet top down to say, this is what we've done, this is what we have to offer, this is how dynamic we are. And it's a major strength of the community college system that the university system that we should exploit, which is we are much, much more dynamic than a university system. The first question out of our mouth is not always, how much can you give us to build this? It's, we would love to build you a workforce. What do you need? You need to partner with us. We need to partner with you. It needs to be a two-sided commitment, but this is who we are, and that's what we're about. We're about workforce development, and this is what we can offer. And the reason the ATE exists is because we want to make sure there's a technician workforce to meet our future demands. And so it's really, truly about education. That ATE book is one of my best friends. I bring that with me every place, and 99% of the people I show it to said, I never realized any of these exist. How can I also get in touch with the cyber one? And I put them in touch. We've had John Sands present from CyberWatch at half of our things. We've had WellDead. We've had LaserTech presented us, because that's what they ask. I didn't realize this. Could we get in touch with the LaserTech Center as well? So we all have to be each other's advisors and ambassadors and really say what we offer that others can't offer. And that's really, and I didn't know. I was as guilty as anyone else. I would have not listened to me walk in that door. I would have been very skeptical. So I understood. Does that help, Nancy?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It wasn't exactly where I thought you were going with it, but that sounds like it's kind of bracing to hear, but it sounds like it's probably really important to hear.
It's important to hear. There's a lot of perceived conceptions of what we do, and what we do is very high tech workforce, and as good as anybody in the world does it. That's why AT's gotten so many accolades over the years. Mm-hmm.
And so, in terms of and how quickly did it grow from just a handful of partners to this 100 plus? What did that look like?
I have a graph of that. Probably year 2 or year 3 was the big growth. We had a planning grant, and really the planning grant was the travel gear. We went around and met, I would say, in 16 states with industry and academia and foreign partnerships, and developed a relationship. And by the end of the first year, we had about 38 partners. By the end of the third year, we were at close to 100 partners. And it was really from the success of programs that we grew. We said, okay, here's what we've done at IRC, here's what Texas Tech did, and here's what Australia Mountain did. And when others see the success, it's easy to show growth. And yep. And I think all of us are in a tremendous position right now, because I can't harp on it enough about the performance-based funding. So many states are going, 15 right now, are going to where graduation rates matter as much as anything else. retention, completion matter as much as anything else. It's not just enrollments anymore. It's not just FTE. And what the whole ATE community does is it has tremendous graduation, it has tremendous certificate, which is considered a completion point, and it has a tremendous retention, because we put so much emphasis on building good curriculum, identifying good students, and pairing them with good faculty. So it's a strong selling point that the whole ATE community should use. Is in an age where we're going to performance funding, this is a really strong best practice that can be replicated across the nation. That is the ATE community, not what I do.
Yeah, so Kevin, we're going to wrap this piece up, but before we do you have any kind of parting advice, maybe even for folks listening, even maybe on even how to make the case for the significance of their work, maybe to their host institution? Because you mentioned a lot about the...
I would not be... if anyone on the phone is either trying to apply for or has an AT project AT grant, your administration is significantly proud of you. They brag about it in all their speeches. They brag about it in all the literature. Remind them all the great stuff you did. Show them how it's affected your institution, and put it in their terms. If you're a performance-based state, put it in terms of retention, completion, graduation, so that they can say, wow, this is something worth either institutionalizing or just supporting financially. And if you're trying to apply for something, use my case, use other people's cases, use Maytech, use the other cases out there of how it's been important and how, but go top down. Make sure your president on down knows the value of the ATE Center.
Well, that's terrific, Kevin. And again, thank you so much. I actually feel like we could probably talk for another hour, but I'm not sure if everyone else would stick around with us. But there's an awful lot to learn here. And I would encourage folks, if questions come to mind after this, feel free to, maybe Rachel's the easiest one of us to contact, or certainly me. You'll have my email at the end of these slides. And we're happy to kind of make sure we can keep getting good information from Kevin that can help everyone. So I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of thoughts, and then we are going to ask you to take a closing poll, which is super helpful for us because we want to make sure we're getting this right and being helpful to you, because in this case, you are our audience and key stakeholder. So when you're thinking about finding the right partner, this is just a reminder that going broad again, they can be lots of different kinds of partners, from other institutions that are just like you to things that are quite different, and obviously local industry. The most important thing to avoid would be a lack of clarity about what that relationship really needs to look like. And I get the feeling like there might be even a sub-theme that has come up here that could probably maybe even bear its own webinar one day, about how to structure them with legal documents, with MOUs. I have a feeling the community probably has something important to share about how those things can be most effective. Because at the end of the day, you want to have the same sense of what we're all in this for, what I'm getting from it, what you're getting from it, and and how that's all going to play out. And so again, keeping in mind mission alignment, that we're in this for the same thing, or if not, just to make sure that we know what we're all in it for, aiming at the overall strength and health of the partners that you're looking for, and also looking at partners for being your champion. As Kevin pointed out just now, like even your host institution is a really key partner when it comes for having a really strong advocate. And finally, just to highlight Kevin's point again, where he mentioned right at the top, there's a really significant difference between having someone who likes to be called a partner because it sounds like they're patting themselves on the back, versus a very, very active and committed partner. And today we were really talking about that second category. So what do we need to know to make sure that the partner you're looking for is willing to invest what it is you really need them to invest? So I'm just going to remind folks that we do have 2 more webinars coming up. Next week is going to zero in on that host institution. So we will take Kevin's thoughts from today and expand further. We hope to have a guest speaker to announce for you shortly, and we'll send out word in the weeks ahead to register for that event. And then the one in March is going to be terrific as well, talking about revenue generation and some of the ups and downs with that. At this point, I believe we have...
yeah, let's go ahead and take our survey. Yep. So Mike is going to open the survey for us, and that should open in a separate window for you. It won't take you but a few minutes to fill out. We really appreciate it. Just take a few minutes to fill that out, and we really want to thank Kevin. It was so wonderful to have you on. So much useful information, and several people asked if they would have access to Kevin's presentation. This whole webinar will be available on the AT Central site tomorrow, so you can go back and look at that. Any of the resources that Nancy shared will also make available too in terms of handouts.
Rachel, can I add, I'm adding my contact information to the chat window. If anyone would like to get in touch with me, I'd be happy to send them a larger, more comprehensive presentation. And I want to thank you all for having me on. This is a topic dear to my heart, and you guys do tremendous work, as you say, accelerating the work of the AT community. You guys are great.
Thank you so much. Well, we hope you guys will join us for the next 2 webinars. Nancy flashed those up, but again, those are the links to sign up for those are also available on the ATE site, and we'll be announcing those. Many of you probably got to the webinars through announcements, so you'll see those again soon. But I think this wraps up the formal part of our webinar today. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Mike.